Hey everyone, I hope you've been well. In the previous video, I talked about trauma and some useful coping mechanisms and also the importance of healing. In this video, I'll be focusing mainly on how you can start your healing journey. There are many different ways for you to start your healing journey, and this is just one of them which I've sort of come up with, which works in a systematic manner. So this is what I call the 4 A's. Let's get straight into it. So the first A stands for awareness. It is very common for us to not be aware of the trauma they've been through or that a certain instant has affected us deeply. Sometimes we see ourselves reacting excessively or quickly to certain instances because somehow that's affected us in the past and we were just not aware of it. And this is usually because our brain has certain protective mechanisms that helps us to forget or detach ourselves from certain traumatic incidences, again, to protect us. So the first step is to be aware. The second A stands for acknowledgement. We acknowledge that these parts exist and that it is okay that it happened. The third A stands for acceptance, where we accept the trauma as part of our lives. It is a chapter in our life. It is not fair to rip out a chapter from a book just because it was not a good one. We accept the parts of us that we're afraid of, or ashamed of, or embarrassed of, and not just the good parts. The last A stands for approach. And within approach, I take it in a step-by-step manner. Sometimes in life, things can get out of control. You may try all sorts of things to protect yourself from harm or from hurt, but sometimes things are just not in your control. For example, the loss of a loved one, the kind of trauma that we get from losing someone close to you and the grieving from that can be really traumatic. This is where consolation helps. Coming to peace with trauma, coming to peace with the fact that it happened and that it's okay. This is usually when there's really nothing else that you could have done to prevent it from happening. And beating yourself up over the fact that it happened is just going to make you feel crappy. So this is the first step where you console yourself that it happened. Now to take one step further, this is where you try to understand why it happened. So for example, you take a step back, you look at the entire picture and all the parties involved and try to understand why it had to happen. For example, of the death of a loved one, let's say they were going through a chronic illness and they were in a lot of pain. And as much as we did lose a loved one, maybe that was their only way of peace. This step, again, this is only if you've made peace with the first step of consolation, and if you can take it one step further and try to understand why it happened. So we've had consolation, and if we can, we try to understand why. The last step, not everyone can do it, not everyone should do it, because every trauma is different. But sometimes, if you want to take it one step further, it might be beneficial to ask, how has this helped me? Or how has this changed me? Or what has this taught me? Because with every traumatic incident, we learn something, either about ourselves or about the people around us. And this is also, I went through something traumatic, like might as well get something out of it. You know what I mean? Literally, like you just step back and you're like, okay, like, how did this help me? Or like, what good did it do? Because one thing I realized, life is beautiful in a way where sometimes the most traumatic things have made us the strongest people that we are today, or some traumatic things that happened in the past has changed us for the better. If you notice, these questions focus on what we can do with this experience, and that is truly what we can control. With this last step, it's sort of like a bonus step. You can develop gratitude for even the worst days of your life. With this step-by-step technique, we sort of divert ourselves away from the negative emotions like anger, envy, hurt, or even sense of hopelessness. Because especially when we do constantly reiterate that trauma is out of your control, when it happens to us, it's out of your control. So when we try to embark on this step-by-step technique, it helps us to understand why certain things happen. Also, sometimes even to be grateful for some of the things that has happened in our lives. Negative emotions, especially when bottled up, is very detrimental to your health. Let's not bottle up our emotions and let's address them and make peace with it. The beautiful thing about this technique is that you don't have to go through all 3 steps in the approach itself. You move on to the next question or the next stage of this last step only if you're ready or only if you can, because again, like I said, all trauma is different. So why even do the 4 A's? What's the point of taking this step-by-step approach to heal ourselves? Well, with every trauma, the one thing that I've sort of felt is that there's a need for closure. And as much as you want to have a screaming match with the person who hurt you most, closure always starts from within. I feel like the 4 A's really helped me with my healing journey. At this juncture, I want to talk about this concept called grief box. A while ago, it kind of blew up on Twitter. Imagine a box with a ball inside, and there is a button on the left. When we are grieving our trauma and this grief is new, the ball is big and it is constantly hitting the button. And every time the button is hit, we feel hurt, we grieve. Little things can trigger the button and we feel pain. But with time, the ball gets smaller. But every now and then, it still hits the button and it still hurts just as much. But this time, when the ball is smaller, you have more time and energy to recover from the last time you were hurt. Sometimes the ball never goes away. I really liked the grief box concept. It's something that's going on in our heads that we can't really see, but this whole ball and box and button sort of puts it in perspective as to what is truly going on. And for me, once you understand what's going on, you can work on how you can make it better. Now imagine there is a ball for every trauma that you've been through. And imagine all the different buttons that you have for each of those balls. Imagine how many times we can get triggered if we do not address the trauma that we've been through. Which is why the 4 A's approach is so important, because it helps you develop resilience, the power to bounce back every time you hit. Because it's inevitable that you're going to feel hurt when you recall a traumatic incident, that the pain is going to be almost identical to how you first felt it. But addressing it, making the ball smaller, will help you with healing. The test gets harder, but you get stronger. This is a perfect example of how we cannot control the hurt that we go through, especially when we recall traumatic incidences. And it's completely okay that you feel these emotions. But the key is that we are strong and that we will bounce back. There was an important concept that was discussed in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a... and basically it said that suffering is biologically useful and it is important to instill change. It breaks that inertia that we feel. Everything that has happened to us, every hard turn, every plot twist, every sudden drop has brought us to exactly where we are today. And appreciating that can really change our perspective of trauma. I want to end this video on a beautiful, beautiful quote. Life is suffrage. The purpose of life is not to stop the suffrage, but to find meaning to suffrage. Remember, suffering is inevitable and healing is our responsibility. So I hope you guys use this 4 A's approach to start your healing journey. Thank you so much for sticking till the end, you guys. I really appreciate your support and I hope you guys have a great day.